Welcome to our asynchronous online presentation at the 2021 New Perspectives in Science Education Conference. In this presentation, we report on a graduate course we designed and implemented as an attempt to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. The course focused on grade school science and Indigenous practices, which introduced students to respectful and authentic ways to integrate the teaching of Western modern science concepts and Indigenous science and practices. In this presentation, we briefly describe the structure and content of the course, the pedagogical approaches used, the challenges and opportunities afforded by co-teaching online, the intersectionality of our diverse ethnic backgrounds, and our perception of student struggles and growth during the course. But first, we will introduce ourselves.
Hello, I'm Dr. Lillian Posser, an assistant professor at the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning, University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada. I'm trained as a science educator and identify as a female, New Canadian, and Latina with dual citizenship Brazilian-Canadian. As a newcomer to Canada, I recognize myself as a settler in treaty territory. I believe that learning to become Canadian involves learning the history of this country, its educational systems, values, culture, and the history of colonization and imperialism, often told through the perspective of the colonizers. To honor and value the experiences of Indigenous peoples in Canada, I embrace my responsibility to broaden students' perspectives on science for validation and integration of Indigenous ways of knowing and learning in as science.
Buju minugijib kinuia, Amy Farrell Nindigenous, Mangname Nindudem, Nindunji Abmatung, Nindujaba Anamik Wikwed. Hello everyone and good morning. My name is Amy Farrell. I belong to the Loon Clan and the Sturgeon Clan. I'm from Fort Hope First Nation, and I grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning in the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba in Canada.
My name is Richard, and I'm a Caucasian, Jewish, second-generation Canadian male. Having learned through the lens of Western modern science throughout my entire educational trajectory, I taught secondary-level science for 11 years before joining the professoriate in 2009. Stemming from facing anti-Semitic personal experiences, my research agenda is grounded in working with teachers from different ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds towards developing relevant and authentic science curriculum, and also teaching and learning experiences that richen science phenomena through mitigating othering and racism while actively promoting belonging and inclusion in our classrooms.
The history of colonialism and imperialism in Canada was marked by the residential school system, in which over 150,000 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and communities and forced to attend these religious schools. From 1831, with the establishment of the first residential school, to 1996, when the last such school closed in Canada. According to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, in its executive summary, as a part of reconciliation, it is imperative that schools in Canada revive Indigenous languages and culture. Youth must also learn about the history and legacy of residential schools, treaties, and Indigenous rights, as well as the historical and contemporary contributions of Indigenous peoples to Canadian society. In the next slide, we describe the course we designed and implemented as an attempt to respond to these calls to action.
Our course was delivered online and asynchronously for 5 weeks during the summer of 2020. The course had a strong hands-on experiential component through curated home-based experiences and investigations. Each week featured 2 classes, one focusing on Indigenous practices and another on modern Western science, both organized by themes. Those themes were the sky, prairie birds and animals, plants and colors, rocks, and STEM. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to modify or completely remove some of the activities we had initially planned for the originally scheduled in-person course. Asynchronous sessions provided more flexibility for students to complete coursework whenever possible, especially given the fact that the schools were closed and children were at home all of the time. To compensate for the lack of face-to-face interactions and to create both personal and content connections, we produced instructional videos for most of the activities. The selection of themes for each week was grounded in the activities we had planned for students. This required us to consider the availability of materials students needed to conduct the activities, the time required for its completion, and the connections to both Indigenous practices and the grades kindergarten to grade 12 Western Modern Science curriculum.
Lessons we learned. All throughout the planning and implementation of the course, we were keenly aware of the limitations of virtual learning. Developing a sense of community in the classroom is challenging within virtual settings. Discussion boards online provided opportunities for students to interact, but it did not replace whole class discussions. We met virtually with our students at the beginning and middle of the course, and these discussions were lively and interesting, making it clear that we missed the richness of more dynamic interactions and opportunities to talk together. The presence of all three course instructors during discussions provided an unparalleled experience to our students, which was appreciated by students and by the three of us. Some students resisted including other cultural forms of science in their teaching and struggled to recognize that mainstream science is cultural, that is, Western European. The different expertise and backgrounds of the three course instructors helped in fostering students' understanding of Western modern science as social-cultural activity, while also allowing them to overcome some of their difficulties in understanding, familiarizing themselves, and integrating Indigenous science in their practices. Students feared tokenism and inadvertently crossing boundaries and being disrespectful of Indigenous traditions. Two-eyed seeing allowed students to approach these two science perspectives without subsuming Indigenous science into Western science. Beyond the work we have started with this course, we must continue to find creative, meaningful, and appropriate ways to include Indigenous perspectives into the science curriculum, which we hope will become standard practice one day soon.
Thank you, and miigwech for listening. We invite you to check our paper as part of the conference proceedings for more information about this course and for the references for sources used and cited in this presentation.